Hi everybody, my name is Dylan Ferrier. I serve as one of the assistant principals here at the high school. I really appreciate you guys coming out for our spring concert series. Tonight, we are especially excited for our jazz concert. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. Just note our fire exits to your right and left, also at the rear of the auditorium. Very important that we take a moment to silence our cell phones. Our students have been working tirelessly to entertain us tonight, and this is their busy season, as you guys know best as their parents and guardians. So we do ask that you remain seated as we switch performances. If you have small children, I completely understand. I have a 2-year-old at home, so that's a different ballgame, all right? I'm just going to put that out there. For our evening tonight, we're going to begin with a performance from our middle school jazz band directed by Mr. Adam Conforti. Yes, Adam. Followed up by our high school jazz combo and jazz ensemble directed by Mr. Frank Petroselli. At the conclusion of that portion, both the high school and middle school students will combine for one last number. Before we begin, special thanks to Mr. Dana Krasinski and the AV team. Without their tireless efforts, these concerts, specifically this one, would not be possible. So thank you, Mr. Krasinski, for all you do. All right, that's enough of me. So let's sit back and enjoy. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Adam Conforti and the middle school jazz band.
Thank you for coming tonight. It's been a pleasure working with you kids after school. You know, it's great that they're motivated to play music at 5 p.m. on a Monday night, so that's awesome. The soloists were Gabe on flute, Lily on trumpet, Maddie on clarinet, my handwriting's terrible, Carter on trombone, Alyssa on piano, Liam on alto sax, Samir on the flute, and Ben on the trombone, and that was Basin Street Blues by Spencer Williams. Our next piece is Rumba Latina by Victor Lopez, and it features a bunch of people soloing. I'll tell you after, because I forgot my paper over there, so enjoy. Thank you very much. That was Fuma Latina by Victor Lopez, and we had Maddie on clarinet, Liam on saxophone, Samir on the flute, Lily on trumpet, Carter on the trombone, all soloing. They all sound fantastic. Our last number is Louie Louie, and we got a whole bunch of solos for this one. We got Samir on flute, Liam on saxophone, Alyssa on it's flute, right? Not piano? Yeah, it's flute. Maddie on clarinet, Ben on trombone, Jack on saxophone, Gabe on flute, Carter on trombone, and Aiden on the trumpet. So enjoy our last piece. Thanks for coming.
So good, right? Another round of applause for our middle schoolers. Awesome job. I confidently speak for the rest of my administrative team here in the building that we are really excited to have them here at the high school next year, a couple of years. So really exciting. So now, without further ado, please help me welcome to the stage our high school jazz combo.
you very much. That's Gabriel Ramos on trombone. Adam Yash on the keys. We're in high school jazz combo. We're going to be doing 3 tunes for you. That was the first one called Cantaloupe Island, written by the great Herbie Hancock. We're going to move on now to a Parker Blues, also known as Billy's Bounce. And if you don't know who Trud Parker is, go home and look him up. This is Billy's Bounce. Thank you. We have one more tune for you here by the great Horace Silver, and you guys should check out. And you're going to hear from our man Will Calhoun on the bass, the foundation of the jazz combo. Thank you very much. This is Song for My Father. now for some big band.
Chase Cassie was being modest and did not introduce himself. So Chase Cassie on the saxophone. While we're setting up, I just want to make a moment and thank our music boosters for all you do for our kids. It's greatly appreciated. So thank you guys very much. High School Jazz Ensemble.
Chase Cassidy on the tenor saxophone. Gabe Volley on the trombone. And Will Nickel on the drums. We're going to continue now. We're going to feature Chase Cassidy on tenor saxophone on a beautiful ballad. Might be familiar to some of you. It goes back a ways, but it's one of those timeless American classic. They call it from the American Songbook, and this is called Skylark. How about one more round of applause? I'm just gonna name all the seniors. I mean, there'll be more, to come in the concerts where they'll get, formally announced with their college and stuff. But I just wanted to kind of recognize them. And if you see their names, and you can see their names in the program, a lot of these students, juniors, seniors alike, freshmen, sophomore, they have a lot of little marks next to their name. They've accomplished a lot of things. We had 3 students here make it into the All-Eastern ensembles. We had Chase Cassidy make it into All-Eastern Jazz Ensemble. Heather Landesky on guitar to All-Eastern Chorus. And Gabe Golly on trombone to the All-Eastern Wind Ensemble. I mean, that's East Coast. We've had many students also this year perform at the All-State Conference and the All-County Conference. So these guys are busy. And they're super dedicated. I mean, they make my jobs so easy. I mean, to be able to come to rehearsal, every Monday at 5 o'clock, and sometimes a few extra rehearsals, and, they're fighting traffic like everybody else, going through that weird thing on 32 with the lights and all that stuff. I still can't figure that one out. Take your life in your hands up there sometimes, but they make it in. Sometimes a little sweaty, but they're here, and they're totally dedicated, and there isn't a better time in my day, So here's our seniors. In the saxophone section, I think they can just stand up, or at least wave. Chase Cassidy, Caleb Kostelowski, and Michael Hauser. In the trombone section, we have Gabe Ramos. In the trumpet section, we have Ken Hamlin. And in our rhythm section, we have Josh Gorlin, Adam Ashton, Tyler Landesky, and William Newman. So, our seniors, class of 2025.
Thank you. Before we play our last tune, I'd just be remiss if I didn't give a warm thank you to our teacher who's made this and so many more moments possible, Mr. Petruselli. As he just said, most of us on stage tonight have had the pleasure and honor to play with and for Mr. Petruselli for 4 years. Through our time at the high school, we have acquired a passion for jazz that was sparked by Mr. Petruselli's devotion and care. Without his guidance and patience, we would be ordinary and lost players. However, through our 5 o'clock rehearsals on Monday nights, we have grown to mature and passionate musicians, all of which is to tribute to Mr. Petruselli. On a personal note, he taught me the inner complexities of jazz after period 8 on days I asked him to play with me. And as I stand before you, I can confidently say that my biggest regret of high school, besides taking AP Chem, was not staying in period 9 to jam with Mr. Petruselli more often. Because as I look back on my high school days, those 45-minute sessions are the moments I'll cherish the most. That is just one of the many testaments to Mr. Petruselli's impact on his students. So on behalf of the seniors, thank you, Mr. Petruselli, for taking our appreciation of the arts to a higher level.
Okay, so for our final piece, Morning Mood, it's a nice Latin number. We're going to feature Ryan Chang on alto saxophone, Tyler Landesky on the guitar, Jeremiah Augustin on trombone, and Anna Mastian on the piano. Thank you very much. And stick around, we have one more number, so you may have heard earlier. We're going to bring our middle school band back up for one last piece.
We are so proud of all of you. While we're waiting for the middle schoolers to come and join the high schoolers on stage, just one final reminder, we do have, I know, you guys have a phenomenal concession stand outside of our large cafeteria. And just a reminder that all proceeds go to student scholarships.
Thank you all very much for coming. Have a wonderful evening and have a healthy spring. Good night.